You're at a party, standing in a small circle of people you genuinely like, and someone walks up, someone you've met before, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, and before they even finish saying hello, you feel it, that quiet, cold drop in your chest, because their name is simply not there. Not buried under something else, not hiding behind a fog of fatigue, just gone. So you do what you always do. You smile a little wider, you lean into the conversation, you maneuver around every moment that might require you to say their name out loud, and the whole time, somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice is whispering that you are the only person in this room who does this, that everyone else somehow effortlessly holds the names of the people they meet, and that there must be something wrong with the way your brain works. But here is what makes this strange, and what most people never stop to think about. You can remember the exact color of the jacket they were wearing the first time you met them. You remember the coffee shop where it happened. You remember one offhand detail they mentioned about their sister's dog. You remember the feeling of the conversation, the texture of it, the little moment when they laughed and looked away. You hold all of that with remarkable precision, just not the name. And if forgetfulness were the real explanation, none of that would be possible. Here is where it gets interesting, because people who forget names are not, as a general rule, people who forget things. They tend to be observant, perceptive, often the kind of person who notices what others miss, the shift in someone's energy mid-conversation, the small contradiction between what a person says and what their body is doing, the emotional undercurrent running beneath an ordinary exchange. That capacity for reading people is real. It is not a compensation myth. It is a genuine cognitive strength, and it comes from the same mental architecture that makes names so difficult to retain. The gift and the burden are not opposites. They are the same thing, expressed in 2 different directions. Because here is the psychological price that almost nobody talks about. When your mind is powerfully oriented toward meaning, toward pattern, toward the emotional weight of an experience, it processes names differently than it processes everything else. Names, especially first names, are largely arbitrary. They carry almost no intrinsic meaning. The name David does not tell you anything about who David is. The name Sarah does not unfold into a story, a texture, an emotional signature. It is a sound attached to a person by coincidence of birth. And for a mind that runs on meaning, that arbitrary quality makes names genuinely difficult to store. You are not being careless. You are not being rude. You are running a cognitive operating system that is quietly, perpetually asking, what does this mean? What does this feel like? What does this tell me? And a name, stripped of context, answers none of those questions. But if that is the explanation, it raises something deeper, because this did not begin with the party. It did not begin with adulthood. This is a pattern that stretches back, and if you trace it far enough, you find where it actually started. For some people, the difficulty with names is largely neurological. The brain encodes information through a system of interconnected networks, and names occupy a peculiar and fragile corner of that system. Unlike faces, which are processed by a specialized region called the fusiform face area, and unlike biographical facts, which anchor themselves to existing knowledge structures, proper names are stored in a relatively isolated cluster with fewer associative pathways leading in and out. This means that even under ideal conditions, names are among the first things to slip away, which is why this is one of the most commonly reported memory complaints across all ages, in all cultures, among all kinds of people. Think of memory as a city. Most information arrives with an address, a neighborhood, streets that connect it to other places. A name without context arrives like a building that appears overnight in an empty lot. No roads leading to it, no landmarks nearby, no way to find it again unless you specifically went looking and still somehow remembered where to look. But for many people, it goes deeper than neurology, and the roots reach back further than adulthood. If you grew up in an environment where you had to read the room carefully, where it was important to sense the mood before speaking, to anticipate emotional weather, to be attuned to how people were feeling rather than simply what they were saying, then your brain trained itself over years and years to prioritize emotional data above almost everything else. The sound of a name flowing past while you were busy reading the tension in someone's voice, cataloging the slight hesitation before they smiled, assessing whether the room was safe, that name simply never made it to storage because the storage was already occupied by something your nervous system had decided was more important. This is not a failure of memory. This is a survival strategy that never got updated to match the life you are living now. You learned to read depth because depth mattered. And now, in rooms that are perfectly safe, you are still running the same program, absorbing meaning at the expense of labels, tracking feeling at the expense of names.
Understanding that changes the question entirely. The question is no longer, what is wrong with me? The question is, where in my daily life is this pattern still showing up? Sign 1. You remember the conversation, but not the person's name, even moments after being introduced. This is the one that tends to produce the most confusion because the failure is so immediate. You are shaking someone's hand, you are hearing their name, and somehow, even as the sound is entering your ears, it is already evaporating. And the reason this happens is that at the precise moment of introduction, your attention is fully occupied by something else. The impression the person is making, the social calculation of what this interaction is, the slight anxiety of a new encounter. You are processing experience. The name passes through unprocessed, like a radio frequency your receiver is not currently tuned to pick up. People who do not experience this often find it baffling, because from the outside, it looks like inattention. But it is almost the opposite of inattention. It is a mind so fully engaged in processing one layer of the encounter that another layer, the purely linguistic, purely arbitrary one, never gets through. Sign 2. You use elaborate workarounds so fluently that others rarely notice. You have become remarkably good at talking to people without ever using their names. You open conversations with "hey" or "hi there," or a warm, non-specific greeting that closes the distance without requiring precision. You ask other people questions in ways that make the answer contain the name you need. You say to a mutual friend, casually, "I was just talking to your colleague," and you wait to see how the story unfolds. You structure entire social situations around the gentle avoidance of a gap that, if it opened, would be embarrassing. The sophistication of these workarounds is itself a sign that the problem runs deep, because you have been quietly engineering around it for a long time. And the social intelligence required to manage the workaround is not trivial. It is, in a way, more cognitively demanding than simply remembering the name would have been. But that too reflects something about how your brain works. You are far more resourceful at navigating social complexity than at retaining isolated labels. Sign 3. You remember names much better in context than in isolation. Ask you the name of someone you know well in the middle of a conversation about something else, and there may be a lag. But put you in the context where you met that person, the same coffee shop, the same kind of gathering, even a similar emotional register, the name appears, sometimes instantly. This is what psychologists call context-dependent memory, and it reveals something important. The name is not always truly gone. It is stored, but it is stored inside the experience, not apart from it. You encoded the person as part of a whole, and to retrieve one piece of the whole, you sometimes need to reconstruct the rest of it first. This is also why you might walk into a room and forget the name of someone standing there, but if you close your eyes and mentally replay the moment you met them, it suddenly surfaces. Your memory is experiential rather than indexical. You are less like a filing cabinet and more like a narrator, and narrators remember stories, not catalog entries. Sign 5. Forgetting a name feels disproportionately shameful. The practical inconvenience of forgetting someone's name is fairly small. The emotional weight, for many people, is enormous. There is often a specific quality of shame attached to it, not the ordinary embarrassment of a small social mistake, but something that feels more personal, more revealing, as though the forgetting is evidence of something deficient at the center of you. This disproportionate shame tends to be most intense in people who already worry about being seen as careless or self-absorbed. People who care deeply about others but fear caring is not always visible from the outside. Because names feel like a symbol of regard, forgetting them feels like evidence of disregard, even when the lived reality is completely the opposite. You can care intensely about a person and still draw a blank at their name, but the cultural script tells you that one cancels out the other. And so the shame arrives, and with it a strange secondary effect, which is that the anxiety about forgetting makes the forgetting worse. When you walk into a room already dreading the moment you might need to use someone's name, that dread occupies the mental space where the name might otherwise have a chance to consolidate. The worry becomes self-fulfilling. You forget not because you do not care, but partly because you care so much about not forgetting. Sign 6. You are better at remembering names when you meet someone one-on-one in groups. In a large introduction, 3 people, 4 people, someone being introduced to the whole room, you can feel the names arriving too fast, layered on top of each other, each one competing for the same limited encoding space. In a one-on-one conversation, there is room, there is time, there is the chance to hear the name, use it once, connect it to something, let it settle. This is not simply about processing speed, it's about the relationship between social load and cognitive availability. When you are managing multiple impressions simultaneously, reading multiple rooms at once, the resources required for meaningful encoding, which is the only kind of encoding your mind seems to do reliably, are spread too thin for any single name to make it through. Sign 7. You often remember names perfectly once you associate them with something meaningful. Someone tells you their name is James, and it doesn't stick. But then you discover that James used to live in the city where you spent a particularly vivid summer, or that James has a daughter the same age of someone you love, or that James said something in the first 5 minutes that landed in you with unusual weight, and suddenly the name is not just a name anymore.
It is a thread attached to something real, and from that moment on, you will not forget it. This is the clearest window into how your memory actually works. It is associative, relational, meaning-seeking. It does not retain labels, it retains connection. Give it a connection, and it will hold the name with remarkable fidelity. Take the connection away, and the name floats loose and eventually disappears. The names you never forget, the people who mattered, the encounters that changed something, the voices that arrived at exactly the right moment are stored with perfect clarity because they came with meaning attached. Sign 7. You feel a specific kind of anxiety before social situations where names will be required. Not the general anxiety of introversion or social performance, but a targeted, name-specific dread. Reunions are complicated. Networking events have a particular quality of low-grade stress. Even something as simple as running into an acquaintance on the street can produce a moment of internal scrambling, a rapid, quiet search through memory that sometimes finds something and sometimes does not. And the anticipation of this scrambling begins before you even arrive. You find yourself mentally rehearsing names on the way to an event, trying to preload the information your brain tends to drop. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the rehearsed names dissolve the moment you are actually standing in the room, because the presence of the person triggers all the same processing that erased the name in the first place. Sign 8. The moment you stop trying to remember a name, it often appears. You have given up mid-conversation, accepted the blankness, moved on, and 20 minutes later, while you were thinking about something completely unrelated, the name simply arrives, fully formed, entirely clear. This is retrieval-induced forgetting running in reverse. The more effortfully you reach for a memory, the more the reaching interferes with the very neural pathways that would retrieve it. When you stop reaching, the interference stops, and the memory surfaces on its own. It has been there the whole time. It was never gone. It was simply being crowded out by the noise of the search itself. Now, consider what happens when this pattern runs unchallenged for years. because the forgetting itself is only the beginning. What accumulates around it is something more complex, a set of psychological habits, subtle distortions, and quiet self-reinforcing loops that the forgetting quietly builds over time without anyone choosing them. The first loop is the performance loop. Every time you navigate a social situation without being able to use someone's name and it goes unnoticed, you get a small reward, relief, the confirmation that you managed it, the sense that the workaround worked. And because the workaround works, you never develop an alternative. You become more skilled at avoidance and no more capable of retention, because the thing that would force new encoding, the slight discomfort of asking someone to repeat their name, the practice of using a name deliberately in conversation, never happens. You have built a remarkably effective system for avoiding the very experience that might have changed things. The second loop is the shame loop. The disproportionate shame around forgetting names tends to produce hypervigilance, an acute, constant monitoring of social situations for the moment the gap might be exposed. That hypervigilance is itself a cognitive load. It occupies working memory, and working memory is precisely what you need for encoding new information. So the shame that arose from the forgetting creates the conditions that guarantee more forgetting, which produces more shame, which deepens the hypervigilance, and the loop continues, self-sealing, invisible from the outside. The third loop is the identity loop, and it is perhaps the most consequential. After enough repetitions, the forgetting stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. You begin to describe yourself as someone who is bad with names, and once that description becomes part of your identity, it functions as a prediction that your brain is motivated to confirm. You stop believing that encoding is something you could do differently, because you have decided, not consciously but effectively, that this is simply who you are. The belief removes the effort, and the absence of effort confirms the belief. None of these loops are chosen. All of them make complete sense as responses to an experience that felt unchangeable. And all of them are, quietly, keeping the experience exactly as it is. But here is what that also means. If the loops are the problem, then the loops are where the change is possible. Principle 1. Change the way you see the problem.
It is a reframing of what is actually happening when you forget a name. You are not revealing indifference. You are revealing a cognitive style, one that prioritizes meaning over label, depth over surface, experience over index. That is not a character flaw wrapped in a memory failure. It is a processing preference with real costs and real strengths, and understanding the difference between those two things changes the relationship you have with the experience. When you walk into a room no longer believing that forgetting a name is evidence of something wrong with you, the shame diminishes. And when the shame diminishes, the hypervigilance softens. And when the hypervigilance softens, some of the cognitive space that was occupied by dread becomes available for actual encoding. The reframe is not just philosophical, it is neurologically consequential. Principle 2. Adjust the way you respond. Encode through meaning, not repetition. The standard advice for remembering names is to repeat them 3 times in your head immediately after hearing them. For most people who struggle with names, this does not work because repetition is exactly the kind of arbitrary processing their minds tend not to retain. What works instead is meaning making. The moment you hear a name, attach it to something, an association, a visual image, an emotional quality, anything that gives it a foothold in the network of things your memory already holds. If someone's name is Maria, and Maria reminds you of your favorite street in a city you love, Maria now has an address in the city of your mind. If someone's name is Thomas, and Thomas shares a characteristic with the most memorable Thomas you have ever known, there is now a thread connecting the new person to something already stored. This is not a trick. It is simply using your memory the way it actually works, relationally, associatively, through connection rather than through repetition. there is also something simpler, something that requires only a small shift in social comfort. It is almost always acceptable to ask someone to repeat their name, to say you want to make sure you have it right, to use the name once deliberately in the first few moments of a conversation. The fear of doing this is almost always larger than the social cost. Most people are slightly flattered when someone cares enough to ask. Principle 3. Create boundaries that fit who you are. This principle is about releasing the expectation that you will perform name remembering the way people who do not share your cognitive style perform it. Not every relationship requires a name retrieved on demand. Not every social situation requires a demonstration of perfect recall. There are contexts where asking is entirely appropriate. Tools that make the task easier, noting names in your phone, writing them down after a meeting, building small systems that offload the burden from a memory that was never designed to carry it this way. And there is a deeper permission here, which is the permission to stop apologizing for how your mind works. You can acknowledge the limitation without treating it as a verdict on your character. You can say honestly that you are working on it and mean it without the understanding of your situation coming attached to shame. The names you care about, you will remember. The ones that slip away are not the ones that matter least. They are the ones that did not yet have a story attached. There is a particular kind of person who can walk into a room and tell you, weeks later, the specific way the light was falling through the windows, the quality of the silence before the music started, the feeling in the air before anything had happened yet, who remembers the sentence that landed and the pause before it and the expression on the face of the person who said it, who holds the emotional truth of an experience long after the details have faded for everyone else in the room. That person is often the same person standing at the edge of a name, reaching for it, coming back empty-handed, and quietly wondering what that says about them. What it says is this: you were built to understand people, and understanding people is not the same thing as cataloging them. Names are labels. What you carry are impressions, and impressions, held with the kind of care and precision you hold them with, are not a lesser kind of memory. They are simply a different one that takes the weight of a person rather than their designation, one that holds the experience of knowing someone rather than the administrative fact of their name. You are not someone who forgets people. You are someone who remembers them differently, and the difference between those two things is not small. Before you go, think of one person whose name you have forgotten, but whose face, whose voice, whose particular way of being in the world you can still picture with complete clarity. Hold that for a moment, because that is not forgetting. That is a different language of memory, speaking in the only vocabulary it knows how to use. If this reached something you recognized in yourself, share it with someone who has ever quietly apologized for forgetting a name. They might need to hear this more than you realize. And if there is one experience from your own life that this brought back, one specific moment, one room, one person whose name escaped you but whose presence never did, I would love to hear it in the comments. Those stories are why this conversation exists.